Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Infinity Fast Forward webinar series. We appreciate you taking some time today to join us. Got a pretty important program. My name is Steve Kessler, and I'm going to host the program today. Um, what we're going to talk about today is actually an issue that's been with us for a long time. We're going to talk today about English language proficiency, this new mandate that can put drivers out of service for failure to be able to be proficient in English. It's gotten a lot of buzz in the industry, so we're going to do the best to explain it and try to take some of your questions. Before we do that, let me just give you all a few housekeeping items. We can't hear you, so if you want to communicate with us, you can use the chat box and pose your question or your comment, or you can use the Q&A box if you prefer to do that to put your questions in. We'll try to take the questions more towards the end of the program so we get an opportunity to answer as many questions as we can. We may not get to all of them, but we generally try to keep the program to under an hour. So why don't y'all jump on the chat? Looks like some of you know the drill here. Tell us who you are, where you are, and who you're with, so we kind of know who's out there. And while y'all are doing that, let me introduce Mark Ray. Mark, as you all know, joins us on most all of our webinars. He's an industry executive, consultant in the industry, has worked in this for 35, 36 years plus now. So he brings a lot of knowledge and experience from the industry. And our guest today, some of you may have met Todd on one of our previous webinars, but with us today is Todd James. Todd's a program manager for DriveWise on their government experience team. If you don't know, DriveWise is a leader in the transportation technology industry that builds innovative solutions for commercial vehicle fleets, drivers, and transportation infrastructure owners and operators. Todd manages relationships in 7 states, trains officers on the use of DriveWise technology, works on autonomous vehicle related programs, and collaborates on the CVSA Level 8 development. Prior to joining DriveWise, Todd spent 26 and a half years with the Colorado State Patrol. He retired as a sergeant in the motor carrier safety section. Todd has 16 years of commercial vehicle enforcement experience, and upon retiring, he was the Compliance, Safety, and Accountability Program Manager for Colorado, which, by the way, is a national award-winning program. Todd has conducted roadside inspections, post-crash inspections, compliance reviews, and safety audits, and is a court-recognized expert in commercial vehicle enforcement. So with that said, Todd, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Hey, great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, Todd James, work with DriveWise. Yeah, I've presented before for this group. Today, we're going to talk about English language proficiency and what that means for driver qualification. And then we're also going to talk about the executive order that was sent out by President Trump in April of 2025. And then I would like everybody to at least make a mental note or jot this down. The FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, sent out a policy relating to this on May 20th of 2025. When you go to the FMCSA website, that policy, what you're going to find is a redacted version. So information in there is basically information. There's no specific information as it relates to what types of questions officers are going to ask your drivers. There's no information in that memo since it's all been redacted about what signs, your road signs that your drivers need to be familiar with. So when you all get a chance, go into the FMCSA website, pull down that policy. You need to know what we're dealing with here. So yeah, we're going to talk about our roadside enforcement of English language proficiency and how it relates to federal motor carrier safety regulations. There's a picture of me. I know I've got a beard, but I just shaved it yesterday so I could look fresh and clean for our webinar. As Steve read in my bio, I did many years in commercial vehicle enforcement. I retired on the trooper side out of our motor carrier section as a sergeant, so I am quite well versed in roadside inspections, interviewing drivers, and some of the trials and tribulations as it relates to drivers' proficiency with English. On a side note, and a fun fact for everybody on the webinar, I'm also fluent in Spanish, so I'm bilingual. So I understand when we're dealing with the driver on a roadside inspection or as part of your hiring or continuing education process of your driver, it is challenging for somebody that speaks several languages to take a question from their second language, process it in their brain in their primary language, and then answer that question in their secondary language. In fact, I was doing this yesterday with some of our customers as we were assessing them as part of my consultant business, and I noticed that the drivers they speak English, but getting the answer out in a timely manner is a bit of a challenge. So what I anticipate for everybody on the webinar is as your drivers are being talked to during a roadside inspection, your inspection time may increase. So be thinking of that, be mindful of that as you're planning your routes and your inspections, that inspectors are now going to be spending more time interviewing your drivers to determine your driver's English language proficiency. We'll talk about the ELP mandate. So what is this mandate? Really, 391.11b2 has been in effect for many, 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 many years. And what that regulation um, states that a driver must be able to read and speak the English language sufficiently to converse with the general public, to understand highway traffic signs and signals in the English language, to respond to official inquiries and make entries on reports and records. So that regulation for a driver to be qualified under Part 391.11, they've always had to meet that criteria. What's changed, and this has changed many times over the years, starting all the way back to I think it was 2007. In 2007, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration came out with a list of questions for enforcement officers to ask drivers on a roadside inspection. And in addition, in that time frame, Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance adopted or brought into the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance out of service criteria English language proficiency. So many years ago, the regulation was there. Officers were enforcing it on roadside inspection, and then they were also putting drivers out of service for violating the provisions of 391.11b2. Well, that changed over the years. The memos were rescinded, things were changed with Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. The regulation was always in place. And then it was decided federally that this would no longer be an out of service criteria. Regulation was in place. Drivers still had to be proficient in English language. However, they were not put out of service. President Trump signed an executive order in April of 2025, bringing and mandating that all drivers of commercial vehicles have to show proficiency in the English language. In addition, in April of 2025, the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance Board of Directors voted to incorporate non-English speaking violations of the regulations into the out of service criteria. So that's what we're dealing with right now, is now effective tomorrow, if you are using a driver that is determined on a roadside inspection by an enforcement official to not be able to demonstrate English and be in compliance with 391.11b2, your driver is going to be put out of service. Now we're going to get into, I know you guys are going to have questions on what does that mean. I'll explain what does out of service mean, how are you going to resolve that, and kind of some nuances with the roadside inspection. Before we move forward, Mark, Steve, is there anything that you guys want to bring up on this slide as we're talking about this mandate?
Well, one of the questions that just popped up was school bus drivers that will they be subjected to the ELP mandate?
So right now, this mandate applies to all interstate drivers. And this is where it gets, and I'm not going to get into the weeds on how states adopt federal regulations, but the short answer to that long, convoluted regulatory mess is yes, I suspect school bus drivers are going to be subject to 391.11(b)(2), which is English language proficiency. That's a good question.
Yeah.
A lot of states have their own divisions within their state that deal specifically with school bus. So here, I'm going to throw this out to the group collectively before we get into a lot of complicated questions. As we're thinking about this, I highly encourage everybody that's participating in this webinar to have a state contact at your state DOT, your state highway patrol, your state police agency that deal with the adoption and enforcement of these regulations, because each state may have some different variances of how they adopt this and then how it's enforced. So for now, I think fair to say that these rules are going to apply to all drivers of commercial vehicles. I think that's the best way to look at this. More globally, more specific questions for you and your operations, I would certainly reach out to your state enforcement partners. So that's a great question. Steve, did you have anything on this one?
No, I was going to mention the schools also, but there's questions popping in already. But why don't you move on and we'll try to take some of these as you may answer some of these in the process of presenting your information.
Okay, great. We're just going to move through the PowerPoint, and then this is designed to be generic information in the PowerPoint, everybody, so that we can have these discussions. Um, so, importance policy update as of tomorrow. Your drivers are going to be placed out of service. What does that mean for your operations? It means your drivers are not going to be allowed to continue down the road until that issue has been resolved. So what does that mean? How do you and how do we on the industry side resolve this issue with the driver that's on a roadside inspection that has been determined by enforcement to not be proficient in the English language proficiency? You have to get them proficient enough to where they can communicate with enforcement, and you're probably going to have a driver sitting there for a while until you get somebody on scene to help them out. So I think that's what this is going to mean for you guys. Again, this could disrupt timely delivery for your freight and time that you have to leave your facilities to when you actually get to a location. Okay. Are we getting questions to pop up on that?
Yeah, I mean, people are asking, how long will the driver be out of service? Somebody
Okay.
come in until he learns the language. Um, People are asking about tutorials, online programs.
Okay,
Um,
great.
I can just jump in here right now real quickly and let everybody know we've created some tools to help with this process. We've created a short video that kind of explains what's changed here, but also have set up a checklist that companies can use either in their hiring process or to evaluate current drivers. It's just a series of questions they can pose in English to get responses back in English. And we feel like they're reasonable questions that might be asked on the roadside. And we've also created a test that can be assigned out to drivers to test their roadside capabilities, road signs. So I'm going to pop up a poll at the end. If you're interested in those things, we'll let you know. But we're trying to put some tools together to help that.
Definitely. You want to start looking for what resources are available for y'all on the fleet side. And I would love to sit here and give you like, hey, these are the questions that our enforcement are going to ask, but I don't have those because they're going to enforcement. I'm assuming that it was all incorporated in that redacted memo that came out in May of 2025. I think it would be fair to say, everybody on the call, that to the benefit for enforcement, this is going to be a challenge for them too. They are going to apply the memo or whatever guidance comes out from Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administrations uniformly and as consistently as they can. Um, I would start right now by talking with your drivers and asking them questions in English, not using a translator service, not using a translating device on a phone. Like, where did you start your day? Because I'm thinking, is if I'm making a traffic stop to get ready to conduct an inspection, these are questions that I would be asking the driver. Where did you start today? Where are you going today? You need to see your driver's license, registration, insurance. Probably going to verify all of the information is correct on those documents. So questions that your drivers need to be familiar with is, where are they loaded? Where are they going? As it relates to their driver's license, maybe questions about, is this where you currently live? These are questions that enforcement ask on traffic stops every time that they do an inspection. I think where it's going to get complicated and maybe where it may get a little bit more subjective for everybody on the call is that your drivers are also going to have to be familiar with English or proficient enough with English to get through a roadside inspection. This is a safety issue. This is a safety issue for the motoring public, that drivers need to show some proficiency in English language. They're not expected to be fluent, but they're expected to be proficient in English. It's a safety issue for your drivers, for the motoring public, and it's also a safety issue for the inspectors that are conducting inspections. I've actually had drivers in Spanish as well as in English, when I give them an instruction, when I'm inspecting a mechanical piece of equipment, that they don't do it, and they have a behavior that is a dangerous behavior. For example, I've had a driver try to start their vehicle when I'm conducting an inspection because they didn't understand the questions that I were asking. So those are things that on the industry side, that I think you all should be very wary of and cognizant of. Everybody attending this call has probably gone through a roadside inspection. So with those experiences that you've had on roadside inspections, be thinking about, what are your drivers required to produce? All of their documentation. They're going to be asked questions, maybe, where's your ELD? And if your driver doesn't have an ELD, I can guarantee you the inspectors are going to ask, well, how do you track your hours of service? Your drivers need to be able to explain that. If you have a driver that's running a time card, or you're tracking your time through maybe some type of a mobile device and you're not on an ELD, drivers are going to need to be able to show the inspectors that. I think there's going to be growing pains both on the fleet side and on the industry side. So what is going to happen with this memo that came out from FMCSA? Inspectors are going to initiate inspections in English if they determine, through processes outlined by FMCSA, that the driver does not meet the English language proficiency standards that are going to be specified by federal motor carriers. They're not going to allow the driver to drive. So they're going to be a two-part assessment, and I remember this from when I was doing inspections back in the mid 2000s. So I anticipate federal motor carriers are going to send out a list of questions for officers to ask drivers. Drivers are going to have to demonstrate some level of proficiency with those questions in English. If they do demonstrate a level of proficiency, I think what's going to happen, at least on my previous experience, the inspector is going to go to step number 2. And step number 2 is going to be a probably printed out piece of paper with identified highway road signs, uniform traffic control signs, speed limits, wrong way, maybe like a do not enter, no U-turn, those types of things. And they're going to ask drivers, they're going to select some of those signs for the drivers and ask them, what is this? And what does this mean to you? If that driver fails to identify or explain those signs, they're going to be put out of service. I will get into what the out of service means for everybody on the call here in just a minute, because I think that's going to be the biggest apprehension for everybody on the call. This is just a snapshot of what came out in the memo. This is an actual screenshot of the memo that's available on Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's website. And you can see that information has been redacted. Okay, so this is what you're going to see when you go to pull down the official FMCSA memo. Again, to reiterate, this is right out of 391.11. Drivers are qualified if they can read and speak the English language proficiently to converse with the general public, to understand highway traffic signs and signals in the English language, to respond to official inquiries, and to make entries on reports and records. So nowhere in there does it they say that they have to be fluent. They basically have to be able to communicate with the roadside inspector efficiently to answer questions that the roadside inspector is going to have. And they also need to be able to read highway traffic signs so that they're not causing crashes because they don't understand what the signs say. Any input, Steve, Mark, are on where we're at right now as we look at the regulatory guidance again?
Well, yeah, let me pose a few of these questions. I think now might be a good time to take them,
Okay.
Todd. Mark has asked if they find a driver that can't pass the proficiency test, in addition to the out of service, does the driver have his license downgraded in FMCSA?
Boy, that's an outstanding question, and the answer to that is I don't know. What I do know is it's going to show up as a violation on a roadside inspection under driver fitness, which will affect your safety management scores. How that's going to affect your scores, I don't know. I don't know if the weighting factors are going to be changed, if it's going to be more severe now. Your driver may or may not receive a citation, a punitive citation from the inspector. Your driver will be placed out of service and will not be allowed to continue until the violation has been remedied. As it relates to CDLs being downgraded, I think that's going to have to be determined by each state individually. So at this point, I don't know what that's going to look like. That's a great question.
Here's another pretty good one. Do they need a reason to perform the English language test? As in, can they only perform this test after pulling them over for an infraction or at a port of entry, etc.? Or can they pull someone over to perform the English proficiency test only?
Well, I don't want to speak on behalf of states, but the way that this should be enacted is through regular enforcement of traffic laws or through enforcement of commercial vehicle inspections. So if officers are out there stopping drivers just to evaluate English language proficiency, I would encourage you to contact that agency if that happens and ask those questions for that agency.
Yeah, I agree. I can't see that they would be stopping people for the normal reasons they would pull someone over. And then at that point in time, they'll know whether they need to establish English proficiency. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to come from a traffic violation through a routine commercial vehicle inspection.
All right. Another question, are we going to be able to data queue the violation? And if so, how would that look?
Absolutely. You always have the opportunity to data queue a violation. And what I encourage you to do is file a data queue on violations that you really feel have been issued and they're invalid. Don't file data queues just to file data queues, because all that does is it bogs down the system and it takes you a longer time to get a response on your actual inquiry. So if any violation that you have on a roadside inspection, if you feel like it was issued in error and you can prove that it was issued in error, absolutely file a data queue. how do you, so how on the industry side with this specific topic, I don't want to get into all of the regulations, but as it relates to English language proficiency, how do we on the industry side prove on a data queue that drivers were qualified, that they met the English language proficiency standard? It all comes through your hiring practices. It all comes through your documentation at your fleet. When you're hiring drivers, I suggest you're asking a series of questions to determine their language proficiency. Maybe establish a test, or if you don't have a test, reach out to third-party vendors that maybe have developed a test to determine English language proficiency. And now with your current drivers, I certainly would be assessing your drivers for how proficient are they in the English language. And I know for some of you with fleets 50 to thousands of vehicles, that can be that's going to be pragmatic, but that's how you can combat this as it comes to a data queue. You have to be able to show, look, I evaluated my driver for proficiency based on this criteria, and I would make it on your side, on the fleet side, I would make this very stringent. And I would have it in documentation. This is how I evaluated my drivers. This is how I proved that they are proficient in the English language. That is the information that you can send in to file your data queue. Again, another good question.
Here's a good one. I knew this one was coming. What about a driver who came from Mexico for Mexican carriers that operate double plate on truck? 90% of those drivers don't speak a word of English. Does this apply to them also? I think we're talking about B1 drivers and such.
I, boy, I'm going to say at this point that yes, it is going to apply to those drivers. However, for those of you that have that specific question, I'm guessing these are carriers along the U.S.-Mexico border. I would reach out to the state that you live in and ask that very specific question in writing to your state partners that are enforcing commercial vehicle rules and regulations and get an answer directly from them. I don't want to give an answer an error and somebody ends up with an issue on a roadside inspection. So for now, I'm going to say that this rule is going to apply for anybody operating a commercial vehicle in interstate commerce. Now, with that being said, we have to be cognizant that we have two borders that are actually affected by states and provinces that have non-English speaking drivers. We can't forget Canada and our drivers that are coming out of Canada, where French may actually be their primary language. So the bottom line is if you're using a driver from anywhere that cannot demonstrate proficiency in the English language, you really need to work with them to where they start to develop that proficiency. Okay. The one thing for my border folks down on the U.S.-Mexico border, I did look inside the memo that came out. Let's see, it was May 20th of 2025. That's the memo on the FMCSA website. There is actually a provision in there for violations that are along the U.S.-Mexico border. And I'm paraphrasing, this isn't verbatim, but for violations along the U.S.-Mexico border, inspectors are being instructed to cite the violation for 391.11B2, but not place the driver out of service. So that's actually in the FMCSA memo. Again, everybody on the call, you need to look at that memo so you know what you're up against.
Yeah, I think it even says something like border territory. So I think that would also include the Canadian border too. I don't think they specified Mexico.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah. Okay. There's all kinds of questions here. I'll let you go through a few more of your
Okay.
slides and then we'll
So,
take some more
so
questions.
for your roadside enforcement, backing up to our question, this is going to be generated through a traffic stop for a violation of a traffic law, for a traffic stop for a commercial vehicle inspection, or at a roadside inspection facility, either a fixed facility or a mobile inspection facility. That's when an officer is going to initiate English language proficiency with your drivers. Here's what the officers have to do. Now, officers are not going to be allowed to use a translation device. I would not be allowed to conduct an interview with a Spanish speaking driver in Spanish. It all has to be done in English, and that's what your drivers are going to start seeing. Please reiterate this with your drivers. I think there's going to be frustration on both sides with the drivers and the fleets as everybody tries to work through this new mandate, and how this is going to be enforced. The inspectors are not going to use translation devices. They will determine your driver's proficiency as specified by Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And if the inspector determines that your drivers are not proficient in English language, they will place them out of service. So let me talk about the out of service order and what that means. Out of service is a set of guidelines that are specified by the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. And then they are the body that enacts the out of service criteria for drivers operating in the United States. If a driver is deemed in violation of a safety regulation, the officer will refer to the out of service criteria to see if that violation is something the driver needs to be placed out of service for. As we are talking about this topic specifically, English language proficiency, when an officer determines a driver based on guidelines sent by Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is in violation of 391.11(b)(2) and is not proficient in the English language, they will place your drivers out of service on the roadside and wherever the inspection is at. What does that mean for you? Basically, what it means, the way to resolve that issue is you're going to have to send somebody else out there to get that driver. And the driver's going to have to spend some time learning English enough to show that they are proficient to be qualified under 391.11. Okay, that's what that means. So you may have a driver that stopped for an inspection. If they're not proficient in the English language as it's being specified, they're out of service at the roadside inspection until somebody gets out there to get them. So that could be problematic if you're in a place like maybe Wendover, Utah, which is 2 hours from Salt Lake City. How are you going to get another driver there? Okay, so be thinking about that. This is a big deal if your drivers get put out of service. Not only is it impacting your operations and the movement of freight, but it's also going to impact somebody else that's going to have to go out there and get the driver and get the vehicle.
Will the replacement driver be tested?
Boy, that's a great question. That is going to all be relative to the resources that the state has or local government entity has to sit there and wait for another driver to show up. I would suspect that given the short resources in the enforcement world, they're not going to sit there and wait for the other driver to show up. What they will do, though, is they're going to be mindful if a driver's placed out of service, what's reasonable for another driver to get there. And they will be watching to see if your drivers violate an out of service order. And that's a whole nother set of problems that
Major problems.
nobody on the call wants to have. Okay.
Wow.
So a couple things that you can do, and I pulled this off of FMCSA's website. There's actually a link right there. I'll leave it for everybody to take a look at, take a snapshot of that. But it's good. It's information that Federal Motor Carriers is sending out saying, hey, everybody on the fleet side, here's some things that you can be doing. Okay, as everybody's looking to move through this new change with the out of service criteria. So I'll give everybody about, I don't know, another 15 seconds or so to jot that down, and you guys can reference that.
And by the way, we'll send out a replay of this that will also have the slide, so you'll have access to that particular link right there.
Great.
So you want to take a few questions here?
Yeah, let's do it because here we are. This is what you guys should expect.
This
So
is what we
let's.
came for.
I'll do my best.
Here's a good question. It says, is the English violation going to be entered into our SMS as a driver fitness violation or an unsafe driving violation?
I suspect because it relates to 391 and qualifications of drivers, I suspect it's going to go in under your driver fitness SMS score. Again, that's Todd James' assessment of this, but I feel like that's where it's going to go.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Uh, Here's a question. It's kind of a loaded question, but it says if they are here illegally, why aren't we involving ICE? Are we aiding people that do not follow our laws?
Yeah, I can't speak to that.
Yeah. All right.
Good-
Oh,
I got I got a good question from my friend Gonzalo who asked a box truck under 26,000 pounds. Are they subject to the English proficiency mandate?
If they are operating in interstate commerce, yes, they will be. If they're operating in intrastate commerce, which means you're staying solely within the confines of the state you're operating in, and you're not transporting any type of interstate freight, it will completely be up to the state that you're operating in. So some states have different laws that define what a commercial vehicle is. So for everybody operating those types of vehicles under 26,000 pounds, reach out to your state that you specifically live in and ask the Highway Patrol, State Police, or DOT that very specific question.
here's a good one. It says, what if you have a team with one bilingual driver, English and Spanish, and the other mainly speaks Spanish? Seems to me like it would matter who's behind the wheel at the time.
It's going to be whoever's driving.
Yeah. So if the driver only speaks Spanish, then there's going to be an issue there probably.
Correct. They're gonna assess that driver for proficiency. Again, following the steps outlined by federal motor carriers. If the driver's in violation, write the violation on the inspection and place the driver out of service. Now, that doesn't prohibit the bilingual driver from getting behind the wheel and continuing the trip, so long as there's not a violation of hours of service.
Very good. Let's see.
Now, Steve, a lot of these questions on the proficiency test, Infinity does have content ready to go out to help document and test your drivers, correct? And you'll get an opportunity to sign up for that demo at the end.
Yeah, what it is we've created there are two parts to it. One is a test that you can send out. You can assign out to your driving fleet or to a prospective driver, and they're just posed a series of signs and asked to indicate what that sign means. The other one is sort of a digital checklist that will give in an in-person interview with the driver a series of logical questions they might be asked on the roadside. And that gives you an opportunity to test enough questions to find out if they've got enough proficiency. Again, we don't know exactly what you should consider to be a pass. But I think you have to have some level of comfort that this driver on a roadside inspection will be able to have a conversation with the driver. So, and I'll pop that up. So, and that's ready today. If you're a current Infinity customer, that's already, I believe, been loaded into your system for your access. If you're not, we're happy to get with you and give you access to these materials to help you through some of this.
And that would
Let's
certainly come in helpful on a data cube.
That's correct.
Absolutely. And as we talk a lot about the enforcement officials and the effect that this has on a safety score. I just have to remind everybody listening to this webinar, you also have to be cognizant of civil litigation. Again, have been studies done by ATRI that discuss the impacts of noncompliance with rules and regulations. I would suggest, as it relates to English language proficiency, come up with your set of questions that, based on your experiences with roadside inspections, questions that officers ask, because they're pretty much all the standard in questions, and develop like a scoring matrix. I know that might seem kind of crazy, but if you had actually a scoring matrix in place, maybe a driver scores a 4 out of 5 or a 0 out of 5. It just gives you something to show that, yes, these are the steps that we're using to evaluate our drivers.
Yeah, here's a good one. Maybe you can answer this one. People are asking how subjective is the test? Every officer has a different level of subjectivity, whether a person is proficient or not. And I guess there's been some guidelines from FMCSA about that. And a lot of people are asking, is that document ever going to be unredacted so we can see what the officers are going to do and use?
I don't know if it's going to ever be unredacted. Back to the subjectivity. I mean, I think with everything that goes on in enforcement and not even enforcement, but outside of enforcement, there's a lot of subjectivity to rules and regulations. I think what officers are going to do is they're going to follow the guidelines that are specified by federal motor carriers, by their agency. Each agency may have a set of criteria to be as fair and impartial to the drivers as they possibly can. Coming from enforcement, we understand that y'all are running a business. I want to be as impartial as I can, but I also have a job to do to make sure that this driver can safely and effectively operate the vehicle and understand English enough to do so. So yeah, there will be some subjectivity, and I think there's going to be some growing pains with this, both on industry side, and on enforcement.
There's quite a few questions about, what are the steps to get back from out of service to be put back in service? Somebody said there or haven't published any steps and there are no requirements been published, so the driver can go on their next trip. Uh, Not if they've been put out of service.
No, they cannot.
Yeah.
Do not do that.
No.
First and foremost, you have to apply the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulation, Part 391.11 B2.
Yeah.
And if that driver under that regulation does not meet those standards in federal safety regulation, they are not a qualified driver under 391.11 B2. If
And
that driver, what you don't want to do is send that driver out on a trip 3 days later and they're still not proficient in the English language. That is dangerous for you as a company and it's dangerous for the motoring public. And it's just going to cause a lot of grief for you as a company as it relates to enforcement.
and our friends in the plaintiff's attorneys world will be able to buy another jet airplane at your expense.
That is it. You have to. I cannot stress this enough. Your drivers have to meet all of the provisions in Part 391, qualifications of drivers. This specific regulation is in Part 391. You have to be compliant in that. You cannot allow a driver that's been placed out of service to violate an out of service order until the driver resolves the issue of being not proficient in English language. That's what it's going to boil down to. How do you assess that? That's going to be up to you guys as fleets. But what I'm telling you is do not violate Part 391 and do not violate out of service orders. To Mark's point, the plaintiff's attorneys are going to laser in on that. That is dangerous for you and it's dangerous for the motoring public to be using drivers that can't sufficiently communicate in English. That's the bottom line.
Trying to read a few other questions here. Do you have any other slides that you wanted to go through?
This is it.
Okay.
It's a bunch.
And
Yeah, I
maybe,
think,
I don't know if because we've only got an hour limited to this. I don't know, can we write down the questions and maybe provide answers to the people that are asking them? 'Cause
yeah,
I'm
all
sure
these
there's
all the chat questions are recorded.
perfect.
So we'll sort through those and try to respond back. And we have the names of the people that posed them.
Okay.
So we'll try to respond back to those. We'll sort of put together those that are the same question and try to answer as many of these as we can. A lot of the questions are how do we get back from being put out of service? Is there a time frame? I think they're going to have to show their proficiency. Who documents that? I'm not sure, Todd, maybe but I think that's a big question here is how do they get out from under being put out of service? And
I
it's
was
possible to
hoping that
do
I
that.
had I was hoping I had some information from Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance on what that verbiage is. I've seen it, but it's not on the on this document that I'm looking at. And basically, I'm paraphrasing, so y'all need to do your research with Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. But if you have a driver put out of service for English language proficiency, they're going to be out of service until they come into compliance with being proficient in English. So, what does that mean? It means if you have a driver that doesn't meet this standard, they may be out of service until they've learned enough language to where they meet that standard, which could be an unspecified amount of time. There is no time frame specified by CVSA as for how long the driver's out of service. It's not like a violation of the 60 or 70 hour rule or breaks out of service. It's until they're no longer until they're no longer violating that standard is what I'm paraphrasing. Uh-oh, Steve, I've lost you.
Hello.
Okay, there we go.
There. I'm sorry. I think with a little passage of time here, and I realize this is going to cause problems for some people, but we'll begin to understand, I believe, what the process is going to be to get a driver back in service,
Hmm.
how that's going to be determined. Uh, there's going to be a lot of pain with this, I think, for a period of time.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I have to agree on the fleet side and on the enforcement side. And again, if you have questions that are specific to your state and the types of vehicles that you're operating, get the knowledge from your state police, your state DOT, your state highway patrol. Ask them these questions, like, does this apply to my vehicle? Because again, every state has got a little bit different standard for intrastate commerce of how they define a commercial vehicle. And I'll give you an example. Some states, a commercial vehicle is defined over 26,000 pounds. Some states, a commercial vehicle is defined over 10,000 pounds. And some states, it could be like in Colorado, over 16,000 pounds. So these rules will apply differently for intra-state operations. If you're crossing state lines, the rule will be enforced uniformly for interstate operations. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of growing pains.
there's a comment here, about back in service. Comment is the company will sign the inspection saying the violation was corrected and put them back in service. The driver should have learned the English language. I don't know if that's how it works, but uh, it's a little bit different than other out of service violations that we've dealt with in the past, that's for
Mhm.
sure.
Yep.
Here's a question about a Canadian driver. So for a Canadian driver, if he is not compliant and placed out of service, they can no longer operate in the United States until he can prove proficiency. Is this correct?
I would say so, yes.
Okay.
Because Canada
Lots
and
of questions.
Mexico, they all comply by Canada, the US, and Mexico all comply with the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance standards as it relates to out of service
Yeah.
criteria.
Yeah. I, there's a quote here that, they'll be able to go back in service once they learn enough English to be able to respond. And however long that takes is what it's going to take. So uh, this is a lot of people commenting this is insane. Um, do we have to put a document in our file?
I don't think you have to, but like due diligence to prove that you've evaluated your drivers and that you're compliant with that part of the regulation, I would say absolutely yes, do that.
Yeah. So I think, recommendations here as we kind of come toward the end, and there literally, folks, there are hundreds of questions here. So we could spend the next 4 hours trying to go through all of them, but a lot of them are the same. But I think an important thing here uh, for companies to do right now, number one, as you hire new drivers, your onboarding process should include English language proficiency testing and evaluation. And I think a lot of companies may want to evaluate current drivers in their fleet for sure, to kind of see where they are so they can address those issues and before drivers get put out of service. Uh, I think it's going to be important to, you know, continue to be on top of this. You know, you and I talked earlier, Todd. There are a lot of languages of drivers in this country,
Yep.
dozens, if not hundreds. And it's going to be important for all those companies, no matter what language your driver's native language is. You're going to have to pay attention to this and make sure that they can do what the law requires. So I think there's going to be some changes. And, you know, even though this is a law that's been on the books forever, the enforcement is back in place.
Yep.
And, you know, we're going to provide, in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and put this poll question up here. And by the way, one other part of this, folks, is if you are a certified director of safety under the NATME program, let us know and we'll send you a certificate so you can claim your NATME points. But we've got some things that we hope can help you folks. Any other final comments? I can read questions for the next 2 hours. So,
Well, the bottom line is there's going to be a lot of discretion by the enforcement officer. What I would put out to the audience here is you have a responsibility now to reach out to your drivers and do some proficiency testing of your own, to help the discretion at the side of the road. You can control that side. You can control your side at least by providing some proficiency training, information exchange. You can't control what's going to happen on the side of the road. So this is
That's
a
right.
big deal. This is a really big deal. And,
Yeah,
and
a lot of this is in fact coming back down to the fleets.
here's an interesting comment. Says if a driver self-certifies as a non-exempt interstate driver, shouldn't the state driver's license agencies have the main responsibility for making sure that 391.11B2 provisions are met? I realize that self-certification is typically tied to MEC, but to me, that gives the state driver license agencies a clue. So I think that's an interesting comment.
Yeah, I mean it's a great comment, and that's, you know, I think with that specific comment or question, that's to be determined, like what state licensing agencies are going to do with this.
Yeah. Here's a good one. And I think maybe you touched on it briefly. Are there legal guidelines for checking proficiency when hiring to avoid discrimination lawsuits?
Oh boy, I would suggest talk to a labor attorney.
That'd be my first thing.
yeah, I would suggest doing nothing is not going to help your case at all.
Right.
You got to do something.
You got to do something.
Yeah. But before we get off, I've never seen this many questions. They are just going nonstop and will continue. But I would ask everybody to do a shout out to Todd, thanking him for sharing this information with the industry. And based on his experience and expertise, we need people like Todd to help us guide through this jungle that we're about to jump into. It's going to be quite a project. So send him a thank you right now. He's done a lot of work on this, and it's we certainly appreciate you.
Well, I'm happy to help, and I'm glad you guys wanted to do something addressing this issue. So I appreciate you guys inviting me to participate.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of thank yous, Todd. And
You're welcome.
to everybody else out there, We have copies of this chat file, and we'll take some time to go through those and pull out some questions that we didn't address. Sadly, in a lot of cases, I don't know if there's an answer to some of these questions just yet. At some point, we'll probably get better guidance on how to get drivers back in service and a little more idea of what this proficiency test is like on the side of the road. We'll get some feedback pretty soon because some drivers are going to experience this pretty quickly, I think.
Mhm.
So hopefully this all helped a little bit. I thank everybody for all the questions. I know this is impacting just about everybody that runs a trucking company. And uh, hopefully the tools that we can help you with might help you with your assessments of these drivers. And if there are any questions that uh, require Todd's expertise, we'll make sure we pass those on to him, and he can either get back to you through us or he can respond back to y'all directly.
Yeah, please reach out.
So Todd will be provided with a list of those of you that attended and registered. So thank y'all very much. I think this was informative, a bit frustrating, but we'll figure it all out at some point. Todd, thank you, sir. Mark, thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thanks to everybody that joined us. Uh, check us out on the next webinar. Thank y'all.
Thanks.
Bye.